What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to a brand new episode of For the Love of Humankind. And as always, I am Jeff. And when I set out to start this podcast, my initial response and my initial goal was really to focus on human experience and human stories and just talking about like what kind of makes people and defines people. And so I really wanted to get back to that, and so I'm thankful to really kind of get back to that with my friend Harley on the episode and show this week. And I'm gonna let Harley just introduce themselves a little bit and talk about what they're all about.
Hi there, my name is Harley Brown, and I am a recent graduate from U of M Flint. I currently work at Michigan State University and in marketing and communications for the College of Nursing.
And so, Harley, you and I met when I was working at U of M Flint. You were a student because we just kind of interacted, whether it was through like residents, whether it was through different organizations, things like that. And it's actually like I remember you and I were talking about kind of your journey into getting ready to graduate and leave school, and I know that you were so excited about it. And I remember right before you graduated, you were like, I'm ready to get out of here. So what's your journey been like since then? Like, how have you just kind of transitioned from being that student to where you're at?
It was honestly like pretty easy because I was applying for jobs, and at one point, a friend of mine in Ann Arbor, one of my former directors at U of M Flint, she transitioned to Ann Arbor, and Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning had an
Mm.
opening because a lot of their staff had left. Um, they had just gotten other positions at the same time, so I came in and filled their role and saw them through Giving Blue Day.
Mm.
So when their other people could start, and I interviewed for this position in February and got a job offer, and then started in March here. So it was a quick turnaround. Had to really just switch into just a full-time worker and being that kind of a person now, like being a real adult.
So being a real adult is hard. I can attest to that, and I'm sure a lot of my friends can also attest to that, because I feel like once you graduate, like nobody prepares you for what it's like to be an adult, because like the stuff that you used to do, like it's not there, right? Like you're working and then you're like, oh
Right.
shit, like what do I do after work? So like what do you find yourself doing outside of work? Like have you developed hobbies? Have you developed passions, or have you continued certain things? Like what does that look like for you?
Honestly, it's been a lot of just hanging out with some of my friends that I wasn't really connected with because I was so focused on
Mm.
school. And it's also just being, well, I have like a side business where I help LGBT politicians and local
Mm.
businesses with their marketing and stuff. So that's some of the stuff I do on the side, but also I do a lot of video gaming.
Okay.
um,
We love that
painting
here.
my nail. We do. Painting my nails. I currently have only 110 different nail polishes.
Okay.
But other than that, it's really taking a lot other times I should rephrase. It's really me just taking moments for my wellness. Like I started yoga after I graduated. I started doing other things to kind of manage stress, but also like learn how to balance.
Okay. So there's a couple things in there that I actually did not know about you. Um, so like, what got you into like the political side of things? Obviously, like I knew your involvement when you were a student, but like, how did you get to that point, and like, what does that look like now, especially as things are like ramping up for the primaries?
I kind of got here by accident. I'm
Okay.
when I was working for Mott Community College, I did a lot of standing in for their communications officer.
Mm-hmm.
So I would meet the governor, the lieutenant governor, and I would do that kind of stuff. So my former boss there was running for a position, and I helped with his campaign
Mm.
and did all of his photos, did a lot of his marketing and stuff. Um, Recently, I haven't been giving it a ton of time because I just moved to Lansing,
Right.
like literally last week. It was a quick turnaround for me.
So wait, so you started this position in March. So you were commuting to the position, or were you working remote?
So I'm a hybrid employee,
Oh, okay.
but I was coming in 2 days a week, but I really just wanted to kind of ingrain myself in this culture because
Yeah.
I've been in Flint for most of my life, if not all of it, basically. So I was ready for a change, ready to do something different than what I knew.
And Lansing is quite different, that's for sure.
It
That
is. Being in a college town is weird.
Yeah, yeah, it's something. It's just always something. There's always something going on. Um, but yeah, like I think that it's interesting with the how you kind of came across that by accident, um, because I knew that you worked at Mott. Because I think honestly, the first time that I had ever met you, I actually think that I interviewed you. Um, and I think we had crossed paths before that, and so I knew that you had worked at Mott and had done that. But like the political side of things, it's so interesting to me because I feel like yes, the politicians are doing the heavy lifting, right? But I think like you have these unsung heroes in the background that are like doing a majority of these things. Um, and so it's interesting to see kind of that how you've stumbled upon that, because yeah, I never would have known that unless you told me.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. I mean, during the summer of 21, the governor was holding listening sessions,
Mm,
and I got to sit in on one of them as a community leader for the Flint area, which was super weird, but super inspiring, and that kind of got fueled that kind of like involvement for the political community because there's a lot of politicians that say really pretty things, but they don't actually put any work behind
mm,
it.
yep.
So it's really inspiring for me to see a politician actually putting in work and going on these kind of listening tours and just listening to Michigan residents talk about anything.
And if that isn't politics in a nutshell, I don't know what is. I mean,
Right?
we see that all the time, right? Like people go up and they're trying to appease the masses, right? Like,
Hmm.
and I think we see that firsthand. And you know, we were promised this luxurious debt relief, student debt relief. Sure, we got something, but like they could have erased it all. But anyway, that's besides the point. But I think that like glorification of what they actually think they're going to bring is very real. And I don't know how this turned into a political conversation, but I you know I think that's a fair point. So obviously transitioning from being a student to being an adult, you know, has its challenges, and like you said, like you wanted to embrace yourself in this culture. You know, you're doing these other side things, but you know, like I said at the beginning, like one of my big focal points of this podcast was really just like getting to know people and having these conversations and understanding like what made them who they are and what's kind of defined their life, what set them on their trajectory to where they are now. So like I know you and I kind of talked a little bit about this before the show, but what have been kind of some of those like defining moments for you? Like what do you feel like has made you who you are? And I know that's a very like that's a big question, right? Like I could probably
It
list
is.
like 30 different trauma cases and like all of these different experiences, but um yeah, like if you had like one or two things that like you feel like really defined you, like what would you say those look like?
I think it's resilience for
Okay.
one of them because I was born to parents who then abandoned me at 3.
Mm,
Like my grandparents always told me the story of how my mom just abandoned me at a daycare and the people drove
mm,
me back to their house and they were like, and like that's when my mom left the picture. My
mm,
dad was in and out of it, but it was all of these odds stacked against me. Like I was
mm,
grew up in a very conservative Christian household,
mm,
so being gay wasn't a thing, even though my aunt was also gay, but we didn't talk about that.
mm,
Um, but it's also just I've had to overcome stuff because I'm too stubborn to give up. I think having the childhood of being born to a drug addicted mother
mm,
and then a father who didn't really want to be a parent really kind of shaped me to gain not only a sense of identity, but also give me a lot of multiple options where I could have gone
Mm.
down really
Yeah.
poor ways, but also very like not great. I guess I should say not poor, but not really great ways.
Yeah.
And I kind of looked at my life and what I could do with it and how I wanted to really just impact others. So that's really where a lot of my core beliefs and my core concerns and how I've guided my life is being the person who I needed as a child.
Mm.
Because um like no offense to my grandparents, they did what they could, but there was so much generations of trauma where I had to be the parent in a lot of the situations between my grandparents, between my real parents, and it was
Mm.
very much like me having to grow up early and being the adult in situations that I shouldn't have had to be in.
Yeah, that's a lot. There's a lot to unpack there, and I don't know that I was ready for that, but like thank you for sharing that. I know that that sometimes isn't always easy to share, but one of my questions for you is like, when do you feel like that like self discovery for you started? Like when you realized that you had to be that for yourself.
I want to say around the ages of 7 or 10,
Okay.
like in that age demographic, because I really had to understand my grandmother's changing emotions at any given
Mm.
point because there's a lot of mental illness there too. But it was also me having to be able to navigate different personalities and
Mm.
people. So that really made me more in tune with myself, but also with others around me.
Yeah, I think that's a huge takeaway, right? Is like you sometimes I think we look at how far people have come and what they're doing, but we don't understand or really like think about all of the shit that they've had to go through to get to that point, right? And like I said, that's the huge focal point of why I wanted to start this podcast. And so like when is there like how do I want to phrase this? Was there like a specific moment in that time frame that just like clicked for you that you were like complete like mental switch like this is what I need to do for myself to like either like survive. I feel like that might be a little dramatic, but essentially like preserve yourself.
There was. I remember specifically like around the age of 10 or 11 where I realized I was gay
Hmm.
and I realized I had to then like not say anything about it because it wouldn't be reacted well,
Hmm.
but also like mask in a way because I also have
Hmm.
ADHD and my parents don't believe in that kind of stuff. Like they kind of do, but they kind of
Hmm.
don't. It's so confusing. Like as people, they are complex themselves,
Hmm.
which that's all you can expect out of people. They're always going to be complex.
Yeah.
But I think around that age is where I was really like, okay, I know like this isn't accepted very well anywhere, and I have to either protect myself and live in hiding about it,
Hmm.
or be out and face a lot of critical judgments from not only my family, but the community
Hmm.
that I grew up in.
Yeah. When like when you like came out, I don't know what that time frame looks like for you. Like what was that I guess like mental process for you? Like how did you balance those two things? Because like obviously those are very heavy things to balance and think about, right? Like how do I be true to myself, but also like how do I avoid this almost like the persecution? Like what did that battle look like?
It was a lot of internal battles with myself because like my family was always the um you are just mentally unwell, like you heard that in
Mm.
church, and all my friends who, because you grew up in a small conservative town,
Yeah.
all of them went to youth group, and that's where it was constantly pushed in my head.
Mm.
And it took me from honestly critically thinking about religion as a whole and how looking at even the pastor being hypocritical in his own
Mm,
preachings.
mm,
And that happened around 14 or 15, where I was like, this man is so hypocritical that he can break things and his family can break things, but we can't.
mm,
And it was more me just realizing that it was a personal vendetta
mm-hmm.
coming from the hatred of this grown man who acted more like a man child than anything, where I was finally able to start exploring that and being more comfortable with myself. And it took me until college to even be comfortable to say it publicly.
Yeah,
Like that was 4 years. I mean, everybody knew and assumed,
yeah.
but I never really actually confirmed if I was or not.
Mm,
So it was very much like, because I also don't like to lie because like that was ingrained in me. And I was like,
yeah,
I just wouldn't answer the question. I'd be like, anyways.
yeah. For lack of a better phrase, and because it's, punny to me, like I think you're preaching to the choir, and I think for a lot of people that grow up in religious families or religious areas, like I think that's a lot of what they see, and I've talked about religion on this podcast before, and I've talked a little bit about the journey that I had in religion, and kind of similar. Like I started realizing the hypocrisy in the church and things like that, and it's hard because like you said, like you become so ingrained with these teachings, and like sometimes like you have these experiences and that's all you know, right? And I
Hmm.
think when that is something that is forced upon you, like sometimes you struggle to like leave that route or that like space because you're like, okay, well, this is all I know. Like, how do I leave that, right? Um,
And
eh,
that's kind of what college gave me. It gave
mm,
me that space myself because at Mott, I ended up joining one of their leadership groups,
mm,
which is still there. And then I interviewed to be on their executive board, and I ended up being president. So
mm,
that really gave me the space to not only be myself for the first
yeah.
time ever, but be around people who are more open-minded and learning.
Well, yeah. I mean, you would think. I don't think you always run into
Right.
that, but yeah.
No.
But no, like I would agree because I think college is such a pivotal point, and I think that's one of the reasons that I first started working in higher education, and probably one of the reasons that you want to continue to be a part of that, right? Is because it is that journey, right? Like people are like trying to figure themselves out. They're trying to figure out who they are. Like they're living on their own for the first time, and I think like you see hopefully some of that self discovery. Obviously, at U of M Flint or other universities that are commuter schools, like you may not see it as much because people are going home. They're not, whatever. They're just driving to class and coming home, still doing that thing. But it is a time for that self discovery, and
Mhm.
like I'm glad that you were able to find that and find that place for you because I think that and I could be wrong, but I think that's helped you just settle more into like who you are, as an individual, and like if I feel like if I were to have met you as a freshman, like when at Mott, compared to like when I actually did meet you, like I feel like there would have been a huge, like like drastic separation of the two. Um, and I think that's something to think about, right? Like we go through a
Oh,
lot of stuff, and like that journey is so important, and we don't always think about that.
it is, and it's about like believing in yourself and having that resilience that guided
Mm,
me to these points. Like I always want to be the better version, the best version of myself, and that's what I always have to work on every day is thinking about myself critically, but also giving myself enough leeway to be like, well, people aren't perfect, A, so jot that down, Harley. But it's also thinking about like how can I better impact a community
mm,
and give back in ways that I needed as a person. And being in higher ed, I get the chance to tell the stories of what our students are doing in their communities.
mm-hmm,
And that's such a cool experience, or how they've grown, how they made the path to where they are now.
mm.
And I think that's such a rewarding experience in and of its own that I come to work just excited every day.
Yeah. I think that's important because that telling of the stories, and sometimes I think, and oftentimes, like, not all of the stories are being told, right? I think there's a lot of stories that are lost. And I think that's one of the things, unfortunately, that I struggled with in higher ed, because as somebody who also wanted to explore those stories and have those stories be heard, there are individuals that could give two shits about those stories, right?
Yep.
And that's really hard for somebody who wants to work through that.
It is, and I've encountered it in my professional career in previous positions where, like, even I won homecoming at U of M Flint, and I was one of the first ever Royals,
Mm,
but U of M Flint didn't even do a story on it. And I know why they didn't.
mm,
We all know why they didn't. It was a person in a dress winning,
yeah.
making a political statement about how transgender people were treated on the campus. I know why it wasn't covered,
Mm.
and I know why it was kind of pushed to the back. Like, and it's one of those situations where I just brushed it off and went, I simply move on because I won this. I got to make the statement,
Mm-hmm.
and no matter how they try to erase it, I will always be one of the first people who won this, was able to make a statement, but also looked really good while doing it.
Listen. That's all you need is like, obviously we want bigger wins than that and change and
Right.
things like that, but um, it does actually blow my mind sometimes, like how progressive the field claims to be, but at the same time is still conservative in a lot of the things that they do. Um, it still blows my mind to this day. Um, but like for you, like thinking about like where you are now, what's like something that you would tell your younger self, like knowing everything that you've been through and knowing like where you are at, like what would that look like?
It's so cheesy, but I always say the same thing whenever I get asked this. I would always tell my younger self that you are going to find so many people that you are going to love and who are going to love you.
Mm,
You really create something beautiful and special by just being yourself, and you get to impact so many people's lives, and you get to create like so many friendships and networks that it's awe-inspiring sometimes when you look at it because you don't realize your impact until you
mm,
like critically look at it. Even now, I'm like thinking about how like I have friends in the governor's office,
mm.
friends that are small business owners, friends that are like international, chasing their dreams. And all of that wouldn't have been possible if I wasn't resilient or
Mm.
confident in myself to be who I am.
Yeah, that's I think that's important, and I think that that resilience piece is huge, right? And I appreciate you sharing those stories and coming on and talking about those things. And honestly, like, I think that is like a super good note to just kind of end the conversation on, because like I think a lot of people can look back and be like, okay, it's like when I was going through this tough stuff when I was younger, yeah, it was hard at the time, but I made it through. Like, I
Right.
persevered, I got through it. Maybe came out with some scrapes at the end, but like all we're doing in this life is learning, and we're learning day in and day out of how to approach everything, right? Like, there's no guide, there's no handbook, um, and I think people expect there to be, and expect that things are going to go perfectly for them. Um, and that's not always the case, right? So,
It's
uh,
not.
I do appreciate you sharing these stories. I do appreciate you coming on and being a part of this, as I kind of again reshift the focus of this podcast back to my original goal of it. Um, and so, thank you so much for spending this time with me. Um, And for those of you listening at home, thank you for listening. We will be back with some more guests throughout the season. As always, I'm your host, Jeff, and this is For the Love of Humankind.